I stood frozen in the middle of our living room. The air felt thick, heavy with the scent of my father's anger and the expensive cologne he always wore. My hands felt cold and shaky as I watched him. He didn't just tear the poster board, he ripped it with furious energy right down the middle, separating the hopeful pictures I had collected. Flour sacks stacked high, smiling customers enjoying coffee, and a shiny chrome espresso machine that was the centerpiece of my dream. A child's fantasy. He shouted, throwing the shredded pieces onto the thick, expensive Persian rug. My mother stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed tight, her face pinched with cold disapproval. "You're 30 years old, Briella. Stop playing with flour and grow up." Then my older brother, Corin, stepped forward, adjusting his tie with a sickeningly smug look on his face. He announced, as if granting a royal decree, that my parents had decided to invest every single cent of the family savings, money I thought was partially mine, into his risky tech company instead of my little bakery idea. He acted like his business was a serious endeavor and mine was a childish scribble. When my father yelled again, his voice cracking with rage, "You're nothing but a dreamer, Briella." My eyes burned, and tears finally fell onto the paper scraps at my feet. It felt like they had ripped out my heart and trampled on it. My name is Briella Hart, and that night, standing among the symbols of my destroyed hope, I stopped being their daughter and started being a promise. A promise I intended to keep. I couldn't stay there for another second. The house felt like a cage built of scorn and high expectations I could never meet. Before the first light of dawn even touched the windows, I slipped out of the house. The hallway clock showed 4:30 in the morning. I moved like a ghost, pausing for a long moment at the top of the stairs, listening for any sign of movement, but hearing only the deep silence of a house pretending to be peaceful. I packed just one old, worn suitcase. Inside, I put only the clothes I needed, the sturdy ones, not the fancy dresses Mom bought, and most importantly, my old, worn-out recipe notebook. Its pages were stained with vanilla and chocolate, holding all my secrets and dreams, every mistake and every victory. The kitchen light was still glowing behind me as I left, casting a long, accusing shadow across the porch. I could almost hear Mom's sharp voice one last time, cutting through the quiet morning. "Grow up." I didn't dare look back at the big colonial house. I just walked straight to the distant bus stop. As the rickety bus rattled and groaned toward the busy city, I thought about all the years I spent trying to earn their love and support. Now, I was finally free of that heavy, impossible burden. I had nothing but my recipes and a stubborn promise to myself. I would build something beautiful and strong out of their cold scorn. My first weeks in the huge, unfamiliar city were incredibly rough and lonely. I crashed on the tiny sofa of my friend, Willow, who was working double shifts as a nurse and barely had room for her own clothes. Her apartment was barely big enough for one person, but her heart was huge and open. I started baking right away, using her small, old oven. It was slow. I could only fit 6 standard cupcakes at a time. It took hours just to make a small batch. Every morning, before Willow woke up, I packed the freshly baked goods into a wicker basket I had bought at a second-hand shop. I sold them outside the big glass office buildings downtown, standing awkwardly on the sidewalk. I felt small and incredibly silly, but I kept my chin up and kept smiling at every hurried face. Most people walked right by me, rushing to their jobs, but a few kind souls stopped. The best moment of those difficult weeks came on a dull Tuesday. A woman in a sharp, expensive suit bought 2 chocolate cupcakes, took a big, satisfying bite right there on the sidewalk, and her eyes lit up. "These are honestly amazing," she said, looking me right in the eye. "You should really open a shop." That single line, that simple, powerful statement of belief, felt like a strong shield. It finally replaced every single cold, cruel insult I had ever heard from my family. I knew my cupcake basket business wouldn't last forever. I needed real money to start a real business with a real kitchen. I worked 2 terrible cleaning jobs and saved every dollar and every loose coin, skipping meals and walking everywhere, until I finally had enough cash for a small deposit and to show some stability. Then, I applied for a small business loan from a local community bank. I spent weeks filling out every form, crafting a detailed business plan that even my father would have approved of, and meeting with bank managers. Finally, I got the thrilling call, approved. The amount was small, but it was everything to me. I cried happy tears right there in the small, hot laundromat, feeling like everything was finally turning around, the promise of the future bright and clear. But happiness never lasted long in my world. 2 days later, the bank manager called back, his voice strained and apologetic. My brother, Corin, had run his latest tech company straight into the ground. It was a complete disaster, a spectacular public failure. Since my father had foolishly co-signed a huge loan for Corin, and I had foolishly guaranteed some of their paperwork years ago when I still trusted them, Dad used my successful loan guarantee to cover Corin's disastrous debt. The bank had to retract my funding. Betrayal came again, sharp, cold, and delivered right from the family I was trying so hard to leave behind. I was back to zero, but this time, the lesson was etched into my soul. I had to be strong enough and smart enough to protect myself from my own blood. The immediate financial loss of the loan was painful, but the hardest part of that month wasn't the money. It was losing Cashin. He was my kind, steady fiancé, and we had planned a simple, happy future together, just a small wedding and a quiet life. But while I was working to rebuild, my family had been busy. After my loan failed, they went straight to Cashin and filled his head with doubt. They convinced him that I would never be stable because I was chasing a silly, childish dream instead of getting a safe, boring office job. They told him I was reckless, a financial risk. Cashin confessed everything to me, sitting across from me at a cheap coffee shop table, his eyes full of worry, but tragically empty of the love he once held. He admitted he was scared of the financial risk. He chose their idea of security over his trust in my ability. I looked at the beautiful diamond ring on my finger for the last time, then slipped it off and gently handed it back to him. My voice was a shaky whisper, barely audible, but the words were clear. A vow to myself as much as a warning to him. You'll regret underestimating a dreamer, Cashin. I walked away from him and the nice, safe, comfortable life he offered. I realized they had hurt me one last, cruel time through the man I loved, proving that my entire family saw my passion as a dangerous weakness, not an incredible strength. My 26th birthday was the worst day I'd had since leaving home. It was not a day filled with cake and parties. It was filled with the bitter smell of smoke and failure. I was working the dreaded night shift washing dishes at a horrible, greasy diner just to save up cash again. Determined to make something good happen, I tried to bake a special batch of fancy, delicate croissants for a weekend market, thinking they would be my big breakthrough product. Instead, I burned them. Completely. They were black, hard, and unusable. I carried the ruined, smoking pastry tray outside and stood behind the diner, watching the garbage dumpster smoke gently. I felt like a complete, utter failure, just as my mother had predicted. Then, Myra, the tough, kind head cook at the diner, walked out for her usual smoke break. She didn't laugh at me, not really. She just looked at the smoking tray, then chuckled deeply through the cigarette smoke and patted my shoulder. "Kid, you're a mess," she said, her voice rough but gentle. "But at least you tried. Most people are too scared of failure to even start, so they never do anything." Her simple, rough faith in me, a total failure standing in the darkness, meant everything. It was like a new, stubborn seed of hope was finally planted right there in the dirty, greasy alley behind the diner. Myra's tough, honest words were the powerful push I needed to get back to work. I realized I couldn't afford my own space yet, and I needed professional equipment. So, I started looking for a shared commercial kitchen space I could rent cheaply. I found a huge, cold place that let me rent the professional ovens and the big mixers only after midnight, once the daytime chefs were done. So, I started working what I called the Craigslist kitchen shift. My entire life became backwards. I baked and mixed from 11 p.m. until 5 a.m. I would fall asleep in my beat-up car for a few hours, curled up with a blanket, then wake up exhausted to deliver my fresh, warm pastries to my small handful of regular customers at dawn. Exhaustion was no longer just something I felt. It became my normal, constant routine. My body ached constantly, my feet hurt, my wrists were weak from kneading, but the wonderful smell of fresh bread and the feeling of the dough in my hands kept me awake and motivated. I was tired, yes, but for the very first time in my life, I was building something that was entirely mine, without compromise or control. My passion was the only thing holding me upright, proving that my dream was truly stronger than my basic need for sleep. My little bakery operation was finally picking up serious steam, running purely on Evander's help and my stubborn will. I had managed to rent a small stall at a big weekend farmer's market, a major step up from selling out of a basket on the sidewalk. I was feeling incredibly proud, and the customers were starting to line up early, knowing my goods sold out fast. Then, like a dark, unwelcome shadow, my brother Corin showed up. He pretended to be a supportive family member, asking to take photos and chat loudly with customers about our family business. But he was only there to hurt me. While I was busy counting change, he quietly found the market manager and whispered that I didn't have a specific retail permit for that exact location, which was technically true, because I thought my general city license covered it. Within minutes, stern-faced inspectors descended on my busy little stall. I was shut down immediately, my goods confiscated, and I was forced to pack up my things in front of a huge, disappointed crowd. The humiliation was immediate, sharp, and deeply personal. It stung worse than any hunger or financial loss I had ever known. Corin stood across the path, trying to look concerned, but I saw the cold, satisfied smirk hidden in the corner of his mouth. The market fiasco should have been the final blow, the thing that ended my dream for good. I felt utterly defeated, sitting on an overturned milk crate, watching my perfect pastries get sealed and thrown into storage bins by the inspectors. My eyes were burning from unshed tears. But then, an unexpected angel walked up to me. Her name was Wren Callahan, and she was a famous local food blogger known for being honest and kind. She had been watching the whole humiliating scene unfold from a distance. She didn't say a word about Corin or the inspectors. She knew I was hurting. Instead, she immediately asked the manager if she could buy the entire confiscated batch of pastries directly from me before they were ruined. The manager, seeing the massive crowd and the expensive food, reluctantly allowed it. Wren took one single bite of my beautiful apple turnover, and her eyes went wide with genuine pleasure. She looked at me, not at the defeated baker, but at the potential. "Do you have an Instagram account?" She asked quickly, already pulling out her phone. I nodded, confused. She started typing fast. Overnight, her amazing post about my pastries and the shocking public unfairness she witnessed went viral. Orders for my small business flooded in, more than Evander and I could ever bake alone. The rush of online orders was incredible and almost overwhelming, but I knew I needed a real, strong name for my business, something that meant something deep to me. My family, for years, had always called me a dreamer, using the word like a sharp insult, a curse thrown at my ambition. Now I decided to take that word back. I decided to wear it like a badge of honor, like a crown. I called my new pop-up business Dreamers Table. It was half a joke against my family's narrow thinking, and half a full-on, serious rebellion against their small, predictable lives. With every cake I decorated and every loaf of sourdough bread I baked, I felt stronger, more protected. The word dreamer no longer felt like something they used to hurt me. It felt like armor, protecting my fragile heart and powerfully fueling my aching hands. The business was still incredibly hard, full of late nights and early mornings, but I was suddenly famous in the city's tough food scene. I was delivering custom boxes to fancy offices, getting recognized by my loyal customers on the street, and even hearing a sweet girl named Anya to help me package everything. I was truly proving that my dream had a real, permanent place at the table. I hadn't heard a single word from my mother in months. I had fully moved on, focusing only on the flour and the mixing bowls, pushing my family and their drama completely out of my mind. Then, one quiet afternoon, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was her. The message was short, sharp, and cold, just like she always was. "Heard you're still selling those pastries. Be careful not to embarrass the family with a food poisoning scandal or bad press." It was the typical, infuriatingly passive-aggressive way she showed she was paying attention, even though she still wasn't showing any real care or pride. My first, immediate reaction was to laugh. It was so typical of her to focus only on potential shame, not my incredible, quiet success. Then I sat down on a bag of flour and quietly cried, thinking about all the support, pride, and love I never got from her. But the moment of weakness passed quickly, as it always did. I wiped my eyes, stood up, and went straight back to the kitchen. I didn't text her back. Instead, I immediately told Evander and Anya that we needed to double our production for the busy week ahead. Her fear of me embarrassing them only made me work twice as hard to become something they couldn't possibly ignore. Despite the initial rush of success, I was working myself to the bone again. The old, rented machines in the commercial kitchen began to fail constantly, breaking down at 3 a.m. and forcing me to mix all the heavy, thick dough by hand. My wrists ached constantly, throbbing with pain, and I was constantly worried about money, especially when the rent on my shared kitchen space suddenly tripled because of rising property costs in the area. One morning, trying to move a huge, heavy sack of flour that was too heavy for me, I just collapsed right onto the cold tile floor. I couldn't move, totally overcome by sheer physical exhaustion. I had hit a wall, total burnout. A kind, quiet man, a chef named Evander, who was renting the kitchen space next to mine, rushed over. He looked tired too, but he was practical and kind. He helped me sit up and handed me a bottle of cold water. "You're trying to do too much alone, kid," he said, shaking his head. "You'll kill yourself before you get your shop open. Hire me part-time. I'll bake the breads, you handle the sweets, and we'll both be able to eat and sleep." That simple, generous offer saved me. A powerful new business partnership was suddenly born right there in the flour dust and crushing exhaustion, built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Evander's help was truly a game changer. His incredible bread-making skills, his sourdough was legendary, combined perfectly with my beautiful sweets and innovative pastries, making Dreamer's Table even more popular and well-rounded. Then, a huge moment arrived that proved our success was undeniable. The local newspaper, the city's largest, ran a full-page, colorful feature story on me. The powerful title was, "The Girl Who Bakes Between Dreams." A detailed article talked about my late-night shifts, my tireless passion, and the unique high quality of my product. Overnight, people started lining the block, waiting in the cold and heat, just to get a taste of my perfect pastries. My small, mobile business had become a local phenomenon, a true success story. My landlord, seeing the massive, loyal crowds and the lines forming every weekend, rushed to me with an amazing offer. He had a real, empty storefront he wanted me to lease, a prime spot. I signed the papers immediately. The best part? The beautiful, large storefront was located right on the same commercial street, less than 2 blocks away, where my brother Corin's failing tech office had just been forced to close its doors forever due to bankruptcy. I felt a silent, cold surge of victory that tasted sweeter than any sugar. The opportunity to finally fit out my real storefront arrived when I was invited to a very fancy investor dinner downtown. I knew this was my best chance to get the big money I needed. I put on my best, most professional dress and practiced my business pitch until the words flowed smoothly. When I walked into the private dining room at the upscale restaurant, I saw him, Mr. Albright, a huge, famous investor known for smart decisions. But seated right next to him, laughing loudly, were my parents. They were there, totally unaware I was invited, courting him desperately for Corin's latest, doomed relaunch idea. The room went silent the moment I appeared in the doorway. My mother gasped audibly and my father's face went hard with shocked anger, but I didn't break my composure. I smiled calmly, shook Mr. Albright's hand firmly, and introduced myself as the final guest. Then I delivered my bakery plan. I spoke confidently about profit margins, customer loyalty, and rapid expansion plans, all with calm, professional precision. I didn't mention my family once. At the end, Mr. Albright looked from my perfect, organized presentation to my stunned father. He smiled and said simply, "I choose the one who is already making money, Mr. Hart." He chose me. The walk out of that fancy restaurant was the most tense, difficult walk of my life. My parents, red-faced and furious, chased me onto the busy street. My father was practically shaking with frustrated anger, his suit jacket crumpled. He immediately accused me of stealing opportunities from my own flesh-and-blood brother, claiming I was destroying his business chances. My mother started to cry dramatically into her napkin, claiming I was causing deep, public humiliation for the family name by competing so aggressively with my own brother in front of an investor. They threw all the blame for their failures at me. I stopped walking and finally turned to face them, my heart surprisingly calm and steady. I looked them straight in the eyes. I didn't shout or cry. I simply whispered, my voice thick with all the cold, hard lessons they had taught me over the years. "You taught me competition was everything, Father. You taught me that only the strongest fighter gets the spoils. Now, you'll just have to live with the result of your own lesson." I walked away mid-tirade, leaving them standing there on the sidewalk, speechless and utterly defeated by my calm. Their attempt to control me or shame me had failed completely. That night, I realized I had finally mastered the harsh, cold language of business and competition they valued so much. The most important day finally came. I cut the ribbon, and Dreamer's Table officially opened its doors for its grand opening. The excitement was massive. The line of eager customers stretched all the way around the city block, even before we opened. The bakery smelled wonderfully, powerfully of cinnamon, vanilla, and the sweet scent of success. The air inside was filled with happy chatter, laughter, and the gentle clink of coffee cups. It was everything I had dreamed of, only bigger and better. The interior was cozy, inviting, and beautifully designed, with warm lights and soft music playing. But the single most important detail was hanging right behind the main counter, where every single person who walked in could see it clearly. It was my original shredded vision board, the one my father had ripped apart with such fury. I had carefully taped every single piece back together, framed it elegantly, and hung it there. It was a silent, visible promise kept. It was a quiet, powerful symbol that everything they had tried to destroy, I had successfully rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful than before. It was my constant way of remembering why I started this difficult journey, and a daily reminder that their doubt was the absolute best fuel I ever had. Success always brings out the worst in people, especially those who envy you. Corin's friends, and probably Corin himself, started a nasty, petty war online soon after the opening. They immediately flooded my business page with fake, terrible one-star reviews on every platform. They wrote outrageous lies about bad service, stale food, and being rude to customers. My staff was worried sick, running to me with every new nasty comment, but I was ready for them. I told everyone not to fight back or argue online. Instead, I bought a huge, beautiful chalkboard and had Evander paint the perfect frame around it. I wrote every single nasty, childish comment on that board with bright chalk. I labeled the board with big, bold letters. Fuel! Underneath the title, I wrote a quote I had read. "The opinions of others are just fuel for the dreamer." Customers absolutely loved my clever, confident response. They felt like they were part of my side of the fight against the bullies. They posted photos of the fuel board, fiercely defending my bakery and my spirit. The resulting free publicity was huge. My sales tripled that week because of the hilarious review war. Corin's attempted sabotage had, ironically, become my best and most effective marketing strategy. My mother, who only showed up when she felt guilty or needed something, made her first appearance since the investor dinner. She sneaked into the bakery early one Tuesday morning before the crowds arrived, wearing huge, dark sunglasses, trying desperately to hide her face and identity. She ordered a black coffee and stood awkwardly near the counter, fidgeting with her purse. Finally, she leaned in close and whispered, her voice rough with worry. "Your father. He's truly sick now, Briella. And he's starting to feel deeply ashamed of how he treated you over the years." It was a clear plea for mercy and help, not a real, heartfelt apology for what she did. I felt a quick, sharp twinge of sadness and pity for her, but I didn't let it show on my face. I didn't offer any forgiveness or even a kind word. Instead, I quietly and slowly packed up a small, elegant box filled with my most beautiful, delicate pastries. I slid the box toward her, said nothing at all, and watched her hurry out the door. Her hands were trembling visibly as she carried the box of sweets I had created from the very dream they mocked. I knew that box of sweet success was far heavier and more powerful than any apology she could ever give me. The city loved my story so much, the narrative of the dreamer overcoming the powerful doubters, that a big daytime television show called City Spotlight wanted to film a feature on me. I agreed immediately, knowing the massive publicity was worth the risk. The segment was carefully planned and focused on my amazing business growth, my unique recipes, and the beautiful look of the cafe. It was perfect. Then, at the very end of the live interview, the host looked straight into the camera, a sly smile on her face, and dramatically revealed my entire secret history. The owner of Dreamer's Table, Dr. Briella Hart, is the very girl whose family called her a dreamer, withdrew their money, and publicly refused to fund her business. It seems the family who called her a dreamer is now calling her constantly to reserve a table. The reveal was massive and unforgettable. My phone immediately exploded with messages from shocked friends, old colleagues, and distant family members who finally understood the truth. My silence was over. The whole city knew the truth of my journey, and they were firmly, loudly on my side. The public, televised recognition was the final, strongest piece of armor against my parents' controlling power. A week after the major television show aired, I received a formal, stiff invitation in the mail. It was from my parents, requesting a private family dinner to talk. I knew exactly what they wanted without even opening the card. They wanted to ask for a massive loan, a partnership, or for me to use my influence to save Corin's rapidly sinking reputation. I decided to go, but I went quietly armed with my usual grace and an iron, unshakable confidence. I wore a simple but expensive, tailored dress, and I showed up exactly on time. They immediately started with fake, overdone praise about my little shop, before quickly getting to the only point that mattered to them. They asked me to let Corin manage the entire business side of Dreamer's Table for a 50% partnership, claiming his MBA made him essential. My father promised it would look much better for the family brand. I just smiled politely and gently, firmly declined the offer. "Thank you for the thought, Father," I told them. "But this dream is self-funded, self-managed, and already incredibly successful. It doesn't need or want any new partners." I had finally won the only competition that ever mattered, the competition for my own life. I refused to help them save face, and the consequences for Corin were immediate and severe. Not long after our tense, final dinner, the terrible news finally broke across the business media. My brother's latest, highly touted tech company officially declared bankruptcy. The financial failure was massive, public, and embarrassing. Reporters actually camped outside their huge, pretentious family mansion, trying to get quotes and photos of the public's shame and desperation. The news painted a clear, detailed picture of his failure and poor management, which was exactly what I had desperately warned them about years ago. I watched the entire, public chaos from the peaceful, warm office above the bakery. I stayed completely silent on all social media platforms and refused every reporter's call for comment. There was no need for me to celebrate their very real pain or gloat over their misfortune. My own success spoke louder than any words I could utter. My busy, thriving, profitable bakery was a constant, clear counterpoint to their public disaster. My powerful silence was the loudest revenge of all. The massive bankruptcy was only the beginning of my father's extreme desperation. He called me to his empty, cold office, his face pale, lined, and tired, looking much older than his years. He begged me one final time to co-sign another huge loan for him. He claimed it was absolutely necessary to save the family reputation and protect the huge house he still lived in. He was truly desperate, stripped of all his former arrogance. I walked into the room, sat down quietly, and pulled a piece of old, brittle paper from my professional portfolio. It was the same tattered, torn piece of my old loan application that he had so carelessly ruined years ago to cover Corin's first debt. I carefully smoothed the paper across the table right in front of him. His eyes widened when he saw the old tears and folds. "Father," I said quietly, pointing directly to the spot where my name was ruined. "You taught me a valuable, hard lesson about guarantees, business, and family loyalty. I won't forget it." I stood up, leaving the ruined paper right there on his immaculate desk. "Not this time," I said, walking out the door. The paper was my final answer, a silent, powerful, and utterly professional rejection of his final manipulation. The real climax arrived weeks later. A strange, very large request came into the bakery's catering system. It was a massive order for an important client lunch, placed under a strange, obviously fake name, the Augusta Group. I had a feeling, a sharp, cold shiver of intuition, but I kept it completely to myself. I prepared the order with extra care and precision, making sure every pastry was absolutely perfect. When it was time for the supposed clients to pick up their order, I stood calmly behind the main counter, waiting. The beautiful door chime rang, and a small, stiff group walked in. It was my mother, my father, and Corin. They were dressed in their finest clothes, still playing the role of the successful elite. They had placed the order hoping I wouldn't be there, assuming the successful cafe was too important for me to bother with. They stared slowly around the crowded, buzzing cafe, taking in the beautiful space, the happy, loyal customers, and the framed vision board. The slow, painful, sinking look of realization crept slowly over their faces. They had walked right into the middle of the thriving empire they thought I was too foolish to ever build. My father stood frozen in the doorway, stammering the word Briellia over and over. He tried to gather his thoughts and started to give a slow, clumsy, public apology for all the years of misunderstanding and misplaced priorities. My mother couldn't meet my eyes. She kept looking at the tile floor, probably thinking of the massive public humiliation she had feared all along. Corin, the arrogant brother, finally dropped his shield. He muttered a quiet, rough admission that sounded more like defeat than praise. "You really did it, Briellia." The moment was everything the little dreamer version of me had ever wanted: vindication, power, and final victory. But I didn't gloat, I didn't shout, and I didn't even point to the vision board. I just smiled a graceful, confident, and professional smile. "No, Corin," I said softly, correcting him. "We could have done this together as a family. But you chose differently, and I chose to build it myself." I walked around the counter, handed them their huge, expensive catering box, and poured them each a complimentary cup of my special blend coffee. I gave them nothing more: no partnership, no money, no forgiveness, and no promises for the future. Just coffee, and the final, crushing realization that their power over me was gone forever. The sun had finally set. The last, loyal customer had left, and the last chair was up on the table. I walked to the front, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace, and locked the front door of the bakery. The silence was deep and restorative after the day's constant rush. I turned off the main lights, but the beautiful, warm glow from the kitchen ovens stayed on, casting a perfect light into the empty room. I walked back toward the counter and stood there for a long moment, right underneath the large, shining sign, Dreamer's Table. The restored, taped-together vision board was still clearly visible in the window reflection, a beacon of light against the dark, quiet street. It was done. This story was no longer about revenge. It was about peace and self-creation. "They called me a dreamer," I whispered to the empty, warm room. They were absolutely right, because dreamers build worlds the doubters can't possibly enter. I took one last, deep breath, smelling the vanilla, the fresh bread, and the sweet scent of freedom. Then I walked away from the glow of the oven, ready for tomorrow. My dream was real, and it was forever mine.